As the rising power seeks to extend its rule across the South China Sea, Donald Kirk reports from Subic Bay in the Philippines, where the United States is preparing to help countries in the region challenge their dominant neighbor. American flags fly fore and aft on the U.S. missile cruiser Shiloh as it docks at a pier across a narrow waterway from decrepit, decaying buildings of an abandoned U.S. naval base at Subic Bay. The dock was once a bulwark of American power in the South China Sea after U.S. forces seized the base from the Spanish in 1899. At the end of a long walkway from the pier to shore, eager shopkeepers again sell souvenirs and taxi drivers lie in wait for sailors primed for a night of carousing in the bars of Olongapo, the base town in the Philippines. Now, nearly a quarter of a century after the U.S. Navy had to give up its Subic Bay base and the Clark Air Base across the Zambales Mountains to the east, Americans are once again ready to defend the Philippines and the region. The Philippines Senate, which had voted in 1991 against renewing the lease on US bases, has dropped its objection to the American return to waters threatened by China's new insistence on its right to rule almost all the South China Sea, including the Spratly Islands claimed by the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia and Brunei. The increasingly acrimonious relations between Beijing and Washington over the vast area of ocean indicate a rising role for the U.S. in defense of not only the Philippines' stake in the waters but also of Vietnam, where 40 years ago the U.S. was ousted in a war for which Subic Bay provided strategic support. On Monday, fresh from proclaiming the right of US ships and planes to move unmolested in waters and airspace claimed by China, the U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter was in Hanoi, listening to a Vietnamese band play the Star-Spangled Banner and declaring, "We are both committed to deepening our defense relationship." That rhetorical flourish came as a rebuff to China's second highest military officer, Admiral Sun Jianguo, Deputy Chief of the People's Liberation Army's General Staff. The previous day, he told regional defense ministers in Singapore that a controversial drive to reclaim land from the shallow waters around Chinese-held islands in the Spratlys was justified, legitimate and reasonable and well within the scope of China's sovereignty. The US and other nations say that China aims to build airstrips and station aircraft on the islands, vastly increasing Beijing's military reach. Mr. Carter had told the same gathering that the pace and scope of land reclamation in the South China Sea sharply raised the risk of miscalculation or conflict between China and others who also claim the same islands, reefs and atolls. China, he said, had to bring its project to an immediate and lasting halt. He did not say it, but those others include the U.S., whose planes have been challenged by Chinese aircraft when flying in contested airspace. Although open warfare does not seem imminent, the prospect of the U.S. returning in force to Subic Bay, once America's largest overseas naval base, has increased tensions. The Shiloh, one of the most advanced US cruisers, armed with guided missiles and cannon, is expected to ply the South China Sea after taking on fuel and supplies. Other vessels, including at least one destroyer, are likely to join it in a mini-flotilla, posing an immediate challenge as China builds airstrips and other facilities on 2,000 acres of land reclaimed in the past 18 months. In Subic Bay, people wonder if the arrival of the Shiloh portends a greater US presence. Hopes are high among local people, to whom US sailors typically provide a bonanza of riches despite the anti-US objections of politicians. "Business is not too good," said a shopkeeper who sold electronic gear to the U.S. military. "We need them." The Americans, though, not only have to live down memories of Iraq's past but more recent episodes in which US servicemen have been accused of rape and murder. A U.S. Marine is now on trial for allegedly asphyxiating a transgender Filipina. Last weekend, US service personnel were permitted to visit the town for the first time since that case, a media sensation, went to trial in March. The U.S. Embassy urged the crew to experience Filipino culture in keeping with strong historic, community and military connections. Crew members passed banners boasting that Olongapo was home to the world's most beautiful women. Their manner, at least before sunset, was polite. Their arrival delighted Olongapo's mayor Roland Paulino, who said their absence had made his town and country poorer. Some locals were more guarded. "They're good and bad," said a policeman. "We are happy to have them, but sometimes they get drunk. Then we have trouble." The arrangement under which the Shiloh is docked is controversial, with left-wingers seeing it as a first step to renewing the base's agreement. But protests have receded as President Benigno Aquino III has hit out at Chinese encroachment. Former naval offices near the dock are in disrepair, but there is talk of rebuilding them as a possible successor to the base. US officials talked only of strengthening people-to-people ties through community outreach. But as China flexes its muscles, the enclave once famed among US sailors, Marines and soldiers on leave from Vietnam as a wild-based town may be about to regain its key strategic importance. Nevertheless, China's sinking of the Vietnamese fishing vessel in a part of the South China Sea claimed by both sides reflects the ongoing tensions among countries involved in a complicated and decades-long territorial dispute. The Roosevelt's commander, Captain Brett Crozier, was stripped of his command last week after a memo he wrote warning that urgent action was needed to protect the lives of his crew was leaked to the media. The U.S. Navy's other aircraft carrier in the Pacific, the USS Ronald Reagan, is also facing a handful of positive cases, a defense. That ship is docked in Yokosuka, Japan, undergoing maintenance. Late last week, a second US Navy installation in Japan, Sasebo Naval Base, reported its first case of coronavirus. Other virus cases have been reported at US installations in South Korea. In total, the U.S. Defense Department reports more than 1,500 coronavirus cases within its ranks. The Pentagon has taken steps to control the spread of the virus within the services, including stopping the movement of troops between installations worldwide and canceling training exercises and even delaying some basic training for recruits, all that comes at a cost, including weariness among troops who were expecting to be rotated back to the States, or lack of familiarity with missions or equipment because training cannot take place.